All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jason Nomura, and welcome to our first session from Twitter to Tenure, where we're going to talk about social media and scholarship and a little bit about some traditional academic points. First of all, we're going to have a little video. We were supposed to have Rob Cooney here from Comeg Medical Center, but he couldn't make it due to some family problems. So he actually recorded his part of the lecture. So we'll start off with that part, and then we'll move into the rest of us.
Good morning. This is Rob Cooney, Associate Program Director at Conema Memorial Medical Center, and today I am coming to you from Indiana, Pennsylvania, not Texas as I had originally planned due to some family medical issues that forced me to cancel my trip last minute. Today I'd like to add my 2 cents into free open access medical education, or FOAMed, and scholarship, and why FOAM should be considered scholarship and where we need to go to make sure that FOAM is scholarship. Now, before I begin the usual and customary disclosures, I have my own online social media-based education site called FlipDM, and I also am part of the team over at iTeachEM, a website that is focusing on bringing the best of medical education pearls to emergency medicine teachers. As we talk about scholarship, I wanted to take a little bit of a walk down memory lane and go back to the foundation of the American higher education system. If you look at higher education and what they originally set out to do, their first mission was to provide education. And this was education to the elite, not to everybody, but to that special group of people. The higher education system stayed this way without much of an additional focus until the Land Grant Colleges Act in the mid-1800s, at which time they added a second mission, and that was service to their communities, the providing of education to everybody that could afford it. And this partly is because it was a growing country. We needed to improve farming. We needed to improve infrastructure and transportation. And so we needed a lot of different specialists, and we needed to educate them. And that's where service kind of came into the view of the educational mission. Around the same time, we also began to see research show up on the mission as well. And that had to do with some exchange of ideas between the German higher education system and the American higher education system. It wasn't till the end of the 1800s, however, that research really started to step up and become the mission instead of a mission. And it was in 1895 that the University of Chicago had each appointee sign an agreement that their promotion in both rank and salary would be dependent upon their research productivity and nothing else. This mission continued to grow until about World War II, when it simply exploded. And that's because the research done in the American higher education system really helped to win the war effort, and afterwards they were able to secure government funding to continue to promote this as part of the mission, or as a critical part of the mission. And it really created this publish or perish culture that exists even today within the higher education system. We began to see some cracks in this system in the 1980s, 1990s, and that's when Ernest Boyer, then chair of the Carnegie Foundation, undertook a study in which he redefined what scholarship actually is. And in his study, he found that there's really 4 separate types of scholarship. There's the scholarship of discovery, and this is finding out things that are unknown. This really is research. So definitely we know that research is scholarship. And so this was kind of the easy one to identify, so to speak. He also identified something called the scholarship of integration. This is scholarship that occurs at the boundaries between 2 fields, which is increasingly prevalent. You know, the boundary of medicine and education is medical education. And so if you're performing scholarship in medical education, you could be performing the scholarship of integration. You know, it's what do these findings from one field mean to another field, and how can we apply them? He also identified the scholarship of application. And the scholarship of application is what we probably would refer to as knowledge translation. It's the bench to bedside phenomenon. How can we take this knowledge and apply it to real world and consequential problems? How can we connect the theory and the practice? The final type of scholarship that Boyer outlined was the scholarship of teaching, otherwise known as the scholarship of teaching and learning. And this he viewed as teachers building bridges between the teacher's understanding and the student's learning. And he considered it a very important type of scholarship that was getting somewhat pushed to the side in favor of the scholarship of discovery. And this is really unfortunate because we have a three-part mission of both education, service, and research. And so education needed to be considered scholarship. Unfortunately, it was a little bit tough to define. It was a grand vision, but how do you define teaching as scholarship? And so one of Boyer's proteges, Charles Glassick, attempted to do this in a follow-up book which he called Scholarship Assessed. And in Scholarship Assessed, he outlines 6 factors that need to be met in order for any of these types of scholarship to be considered quality scholarship. And so his 6 factors were clear goals, adequate preparation, appropriate methods, significant results, effective presentation of those results, and finally a reflective critique. And if you look at the questions that he outlines under each of these things, it really sounds like typical research being applied to any of the types of scholarship. So under clear goals, does the scholar state the basic purpose of his work clearly? Under appropriate methods, does the scholar use methods appropriate to the goals? Under results, does the scholar's work add consequentially to the field? So all of these things, it simply just sounds like taking the scientific method a little bit and applying it to teaching, which wasn't Boyer's original intent. Fortunately, another protege clarified it in a little bit more simplistic terms, and this is Schulman, and he outlined 3 things that need to be met in order for teaching to be considered scholarship. And he feels that the work must be made public, the work must be peer-reviewed, or at least open to peer review, and finally, there must be replicability, or the work must be able to be reproduced by other scholars within the field. And it's these 3 things that I think outline how free open access medical education and scholarship are going to converge. So first, public. By its very nature, social media is a public format. It's on all the time. It is widely available. It is not hidden behind firewalls or passwords, usually at least. It is also peer-reviewed. Despite the criticisms out there that free open access medical education is not peer-reviewed, it is. It is just peer-reviewed in a different format, and it's what we would refer to as post-publication peer review. There's a growing body of literature that pre-publication peer review doesn't quite accomplish the goals that we would like it to. It does not keep fraudulent findings out of the medical literature, as the vaccine debacle a couple of years ago showed us. With post-publication peer review, it is very easy to go in and correct mistakes that are made and eliminate them from the online content. This happened to me when I used to do board review pearls on Twitter. I put out a factoid that was incorrect. One of my readers replied to me and said, "Hey, you've got this wrong," and I was able to catch it and correct it and push out that correction right away. Contrast that with traditional scholarly journals in which the correction gets put into an issue a couple of weeks or months later, and you may not even know about it. Even when you go to download that article, at the very end of the article, there's often that caption that a correction to this article is available at, and they give the address. Finally, reproducibility. When you look at teaching and reproducing it, how does this work? If you're looking at a lecture, perhaps you take that other teacher's lecture, you look at their content, you see how it is applicable to your own setting, you modify it to make it your own. But in order to do that effectively, you need to know where that teacher got their content. Is this their own opinion, or is this something that they actually based on fact? Or what we believe to be fact. And that's where the replicability of free open access medical education has slowly been improving over the last couple of years. There have been podcasts and blogs out there where people make statements about this is how you should attempt to treat this condition without offering up where they formulated that opinion. Is that simply their opinion, or is that something that is based on evidence? And so this is where I think we need to get a little bit more transparent within open access medical education. And it's where I think we are actually seeing that transparency as well. If you look at the high-performing blogs, Michelle Lynn's Academic Life in Emergency Medicine, Scott Weingart's EM Crit, they will all include references when available. And even Scott Weingart will even sometimes put not only the reference, but the full paper up there if it is an open access paper. And this allows you as an educator to critically evaluate the content and to be able to reproduce that content for your own shop if you so desired. And so I think moving forward, if we want to consider online open access medical education scholarship, we need to follow these tenets, the tenets of quality when we can, and definitely the tenets of scholarly teaching of being public, peer-reviewed, and reproducible in order to consider what we do scholarship. So those are my 2 cents on this topic. I hope you enjoyed listening. I hope you're having a great conference, and I'm going through a little bit of withdrawal, wishing that I was down there with you. Thanks for listening.
So that was Rob Cooney, and if you want to, it's at EM Education. My name's Jason Nomura. I'm over at Christiana Care as the Ultrasound Fellowship Director, and it's at Takeo Kun, and in case you're wondering, that's my middle name because Jason's fairly common. And in Asia, so is Nomura. So what we want to talk about was a little bit about academic achievement and how social media can help you with this. And there's a little bit of a little truth in advertising here, because wherever you are, your tenure and promotion committee is going to have the final say. So we can give you advice and we can tell you things, but everything's going to be a little different on the local level. So just keep that in mind. And as academic faculty, we have to do things like research, provide education, and have academic achievements. And under that is the scholarly activity requirement from the RRC, which the RRC defines as possibly peer-reviewed funding, publication of original research or review articles in peer-reviewed journals or chapters and textbooks. They also say that you can present cases at the local, regional, or national levels or scientific meetings and participate in national committees and educational organizations. And that's right in the RRC document as faculty what we're supposed to be doing for scholarly activity. However, if you then follow up with the RRC frequently asked questions, they delve into a little bit more broad category in how you define some of these things. And right in there, non-peer reviewed as scholarly activities, this would include all submissions to journals or online venues that do not fulfill peer review criteria, as in pre-publication peer review, as the RRC defines it. Not necessarily as we define it. And in there, they also say specifically, category also includes educational videos, DVDs, and podcasts directly from the RRC on the ACGME letterhead paperwork. Just as a FYI, yeah. It's buried in like the frequently asked questions. It's not on the, you gotta know where to look. And then there's a discussion of alt metrics, which is something that we're moving towards, but not necessarily there yet. But the National Science Foundation now asks you to list educational and research products, and they specifically say products, not just publications, because of things like Mendeley and these social networks where you can share research information. So they're looking at these things and kind of considering that towards your grant applications and your CVs. And one of the things we want to talk about a little bit is how we each kind of got here and how we've used social media as a way to promote our academic standings, build our CVs, and reach faculty points, so to speak. So I started back in the early 90s on Usenet, which some of you probably never heard of. Some of us probably have, some of us never have. And then there were like text-based mud things in college. So that was like the online, that was the early version of like the Xbox network. All text, that was the advanced one where you actually had color words. And then I got into Facebook from some friends, and then I got onto Twitter, and this, as you can see, this was back in 2009. I finally joined, and this was back then. You can actually look for your first tweet and see what it actually was and when it was, as kind of a timeline for yourself. That's what got me into live tweeting from conferences so I could take notes and get information, which then, like at the conference, this was from last year at SAEM 13, and you can see the big spike and the curve here, but I started a little bit earlier at one of the SAEM conferences, which caught the eye of the social media committee, which had gone from interest group to committee. And that's how I got involved with the social media committee and eventually became chair of that committee for a period. But now it's Brett Rosen who's in the crowd, which also led me to joining the AIUM social media committee and the CORD social media committee, which are positions on national conferences. So these are all things that are considered scholarly activity by the narrow definition, the RSC document. So these are all things that fulfill some of those requirements. It also got me invited to the AIUM, one of the ultrasound organizations, Ultrasound First program, where we're having a big, like a consensus conference about using ultrasound before ionizing radiation. And that was purely because of social media work. And you can get invited to some of these conferences because of your work there. We also got a peer-reviewed publication out of it about Twitter use during some EM conferences. And because I was on Twitter and social media, various forms of social media, I got contacted by someone who found me and wanted help writing up an ultrasound case review. So we did that too. And then, of course, coming to all the different conferences, being at SAEM 12, 13, 14, AIUM, having the opportunity to give didactics like this one here, which are invited lectures on the national circuit, which also helps. So there were a bunch of things that got us here. And we have several speakers today, myself. We've already heard from Rob Coney. We're going to hear from Michelle and Nick. Yep.
All right, guys. Hey, so what is your favorite movie quote? Think about that for a bit. Mine here is relevant to this talk, I promise, which is, with great power comes great responsibility. That is by far the definition of social media. You can use it for frivolity and all the stuff that Justin Bieber wants to use it for, or you can use it for good and for impactfulness. And so my point here is just to say that social media is purely a tool, and we really maybe shouldn't be thinking about how do we make social media fit in academics, but figure out the question of what is it that you want out of academics? Like, what do you want to do? What is the purpose of academia? And then flip it and say, well, then how does social media fit into that? Because maybe we're not asking the right question to start off with. So again, what are your goals? And for me, I think the best generic sense that kind of encapsulates all of us, I think, and why we do academia are four things. We want to teach, but not just that, but teach with reach. We want to collaborate with like-minded individuals who are not just by convenience. They're not at your site. They're not, in the hospital or regional. You want to really collaborate with those around the world who are thinking and aligned in the mission that you want to accomplish. 3, you want to become an expert by doing. And 4th, we all kind of have to play the game of climbing that academic ladder where, plus or minus, we really believe in a lot of the metrics that they currently value. And so think about going back to let's say, for those of you 5 years out of residency, how did you get started in academia? Let's think about that story that got you to this point. How did you get to that grant? How did you get to that publication? And for me, I can kind of share with you my story, which is I had some great mentors just purely by luck. And it took years and years of getting on the lecture circuit little by little, all the way through the AAEM circuit, the ACEP circuit. I could have used more people in the audience. I mean, thank goodness you guys are here. But there's more you go through all these steps that takes years to do, and that's how you become a known educator. That's like a 5-10 year process, but that's completely changed now with social media. You can publish in textbooks. You can become textbook editors. Again, that's a long process to become known as an educator. You can publish in journals. It takes a while to get those grants going, right? I'm sure you guys all know. You can go to meetings, whether it be hospital-based, regional, national meetings. You're going to be doing these things on an iterative basis. But what happens now is that social media, now that it's here, I'm realizing these are creating brand new superstars in academics. And it's no longer this path of put in the time and then go from local to global type phenomenon. It's just you start global and then you make your name. And so it's really accelerated that timeline, and it's also really kind of flipped the whole model on its head. And so what I wanted to share with you is my story, and in terms of, I feel like I've started a second career ever since I kind of delved into the social media arena. And it started with this blog that's primarily was just a random site that I said, I'm going to put up my lecture handouts in there. I'm going to put up my genius thoughts at 3 a.m. because I have nobody else to talk to about these things. And it just all kind of went up about education, about academia, things I thought students should know, everything. And then over time, it's built up so that I'm like, wow, people are actually reading this. I'm not sure why, but let's keep like running with this. And so in 2009 to now, it's about like a million page views a year that we're reaching, just because we have kind of a huge breadth of topics that we cover. There's a lot of Twitter followers, there's a lot of Facebook followers, and I'm just realizing now this is the definition of how you teach with reach. And that's where social media, at least from an educator standpoint, really plays into our strengths. But it's not a one-person job. I have a whole army of people who help out with this endeavor. You can see here, there's 9 of them listed here. There's a couple of you guys maybe even in the audience. But I think before social media, I would not have met these people in such accelerated form as I have. There's a resident, there's a fellow, there's a PharmD, there are 2 people from Canada. They're from all over the place, and we have very, very similar missions in mind about how we can move forward the field of education and medical education. There's even an assistant dean. Rahul's not here today. But realize 5 of these I met on Twitter, right? These are not people I met at random conferences where you normally do networking. Networking now occurs on the Twitter platform. And in fact, I have yet to meet I still have yet to meet 3 of them, and I think I've published a couple of things with them already. Right, so it's kind of a whole new world model about what you can get done in social media. And so I think of Twitter now as the quote-unquote digital water cooler. I'm like, who wouldn't want to eavesdrop on a conversation that I'm almost having with someone about an ECG? Right, you'd be crazy not to listen to these teaching points. And so you'll see that like established educators and researchers, they're on Twitter. If Jeff Klein is on Twitter, there's something to it. Right? You should join. Jeff Klein is on there. Esther Chu is on there. People are tweeting about things and adding value to medical education. You can also see the new superstars of emergency medicine education are also going to be there. Sal's here. Or you can see his Twitter handle. You have Lauren Westifer, who does a lot of stuff with clinical reasoning and social media. Swami's here. You can see all of his tweets. This is the new age of the star educators. And you should join. I mean, this is a new age. It's not going to go away. And you should follow what these people are doing. And so becoming an expert in today's world of medical education, that I think is quickly changing, and it's continuing to grow at a rapid pace. And I encourage you to at least to get a Twitter account, listen to what these people are saying. You don't need to go crazy and check it every day, but if you want to, you could. So just get it, take a listen, see what people are talking about. And so social media is also redefining how we climb that academic ladder, right? So we talked about teach with reach, find collaborators, become an expert by doing, and then climbing the academic ladder. And so what we're trying to do in our blog is like, can we think about a more scholarly approach to what we're doing, right? Why do we have to do social media over here and then do education research over there? I think there is a middle ground that you can share and think about. Maybe we can publish this in a more scholarly form. So actually this past year, we've really kind of gone crazy. And fortunately, I'm able to partner with people who love to write because ironically, I don't like to write. I've finally learned that. I don't like to write at all. I like to edit. So I have a bunch of people who love to write, and it just works out really well. So what we do is we realize that data is power. We started publishing some things, and then we also, in our CV, started putting in metrics. And metrics, data is power in your CV. So as an assistant professor, right, you need to show that you have some local, regional impact. How do you show that in a textbook? I don't know. How do you really show that in a journal article you wrote? I'm still not sure. There's an impact factor, a couple of alt metrics, but I can show from my blog my regional stats. So this is a 1-month stat, like 28-day stat of all the people who have visited the site and which pages they came to. Associate professor, you want to be known at a national level. You can give them, again, more stats. You can list the cities if you want and the number of times that city came to visit your site. To a full professor, you need to show international impact. Easy enough. You pull this up. This is on Google Analytics for blogs. It's a free service. Boom, you put that map in and that argument is pretty much over. So again, data is power. Think about adding some scholarly activities to what you're already doing. And so fortunately, recently we've partnered with Annals of Emergency Medicine to work on a lot of things like Journal Club, and they give me this back door basically to publish summaries of our discussions. And then you get invited because you are known in this field, because you're just experimenting, you're iteratively designing this field. People come to you for expert opinion pieces. So Journal of GME have come to us, and we're starting to put a lot of innovation papers out. So I do encourage you, as you're kind of delving into this field, think about this from an education standpoint, but also from a scholarly standpoint, and maybe 1 + 1 = 2. So with that, I think I wanted to end, and we'll move on with the closer.
Okay, so I'm Nicholas Jeans, and I'm going to be talking about how I got here. First, some acknowledgments and disclosures. I've never accepted ads on my personal blog, but I was a founding member of MedGadget, which runs on advertising. And like Michelle said, I got into this for writing, but now I'm an editor, and I like it much better, editor at EP Monthly. And honestly, I used to do research with chondrocyte mechanotransduction and cartilage, and it was fun, and I thought I enjoyed it. But when I got into emergency medicine, I realized the importance of informatics, and I've always kind of considered social media as like part of informatics and getting quality information to the bedside to affect medical decision making. I saw the relevance of that, and so I kind of redirected my career around informatics. And I have to give a quote that really had a lot of relevance for me from many years ago. It's from Douglas Adams, and it says, "I've come up with a set of rules that describe our reaction to technologies. 1, anything in the world that exists when you're born is normal and ordinary and just a part of the natural world. 2, anything that's invented between your time you're 15 and 35 is new and exciting and revolutionary, and you can probably get a career in it." That's my emphasis on it. And then 3, anything invented after you're 35 is against the natural order of things. And that is true. And so if you find yourself evangelizing or discussing a technology and you're trying to get your director or your chair like persuaded, like you should really pay attention to this, then that's a sign that maybe this is a career for you. And the unfortunate corollary is that the people coming up behind you are going to view your work as completely obvious, and you're not going to understand what they're doing. You're going to think that they're being foolish. So let's go back 10 years. I was still in medical school. I just kind of discovered emergency medicine, and I left the cartilage behind. And blogs were the word of the year. And blogs were very disruptive to journalism, to politics. It was really shining a light on a lot of industries, like really opening doors and kind of exposing things. And I thought medicine. Oh, by the way, what was the word of the year last year? Anyone know? Merriam-Webster. It was selfie. So if you can make a career out of selfies, more power to you. Who knows? Maybe there's some obvious application that I'm just not thinking of. But anyway, I thought medicine was very underrepresented in the blogosphere. And I was a medical student. I had a lot to share. So I started a blog. And the truth is, it was trivially easy to start a blog. And it's only gotten easier as time goes on. The technology just walks you through it. And you can start sharing. You can start finding like-minded individuals. And this was before Twitter and Facebook and stuff. So blogs were really, I thought, the ideal medium to kind of do that. And so I started with blogorigami, pun on vowel sounds. And 10 years later, the blog still looks very much the same. I don't blog too much anymore. I usually do Twitter and Facebook and EP Monthly, but it's still there if anyone wants to go back and read those ancient posts. But I kind of started a community of other medical bloggers at the time, and a lot of us were writing anonymously. It was very amateurish, some funny stories, some rants and so forth. It wasn't really stuff that you could put on your CV, stuff to build a career. But with time, people started lighting the way and setting a good example. And now a lot of bloggers have taken jobs at mainstream media sources or become brands in their own respect. And you get these great, nuanced views of research and healthcare reform and medical education. And a lot of people have risen to prominence through blogs. And my career path has kind of reflected that. Early on, I was doing a lot of potpourri stuff. I was talking about the technology. I was linking to news and commentary. I was even doing some educational stuff back in the day. Halfway through, I kind of started pivoting and talking about guideline development and committee work and professionalism. And now I've kind of changed again and focusing on using social media for actual scholarly research. And I'll talk about each of these 3 phases. First, when I was an intern, now 2005, 2006, I started a journal club blog. Again, once you start one blog, you just want to keep starting other blogs. And this was popular, and this got me my first presentation at SAEM because I thought that it was an innovation in emergency medicine education. So I've always been grateful to SAEM for kind of endorsing this from a long time. And I just thought blogs were excellent for an adjunct to Journal Club, to link to the paper, to kind of summarize the discussion, and you could quickly access it on shift. You could quickly search for the terms you were looking for, and I thought it was a good, useful tool. But with time, educators like Michelle Lin, like the Life in the Fast Lane folks, like SAEM, really shown me that it's not about the tool so much, it's about the passion for education. And these folks have really just done so much with the medium. I realized that education is its own niche in social media, and it's got its own hashtags like FOMED and MedEd, but it's not really where my passion lied, so I kind of moved on. And I remembered some guidance from my former program director, now chair. He said when I first told him that I had a blog and was going to continue blogging, he said, just don't write anything we'll both regret. Very good economy of words. And I always took those words to heart. Not everyone at Mount Sinai did that. And so some internal medicine residents posted a video in 2009. And it's pretty funny, and it's not obscene or anything like that, but they used Sinai as a backdrop, and they actually filmed in some of the hallways and the call rooms, and the video's still up if you ever want to look at it. But some of the powers that be, were very concerned, and they said we need to come up with guidelines for the appropriate use of social media, and they reached out to all the department chairs, and Jagoda thought, gosh, I've got a social media guy in my department, he should be on the committee, and that was my first committee work. And that, we crafted some guidelines for the responsible use of social media. And then SAEM came calling, and they started a social media committee, and they wanted guidelines, and I was available. And so we helped draft SAEM's first guidelines, and that was my first national committee. And then, once you're off and running, and you have a lecture or two in hand, and you collect these stories of irresponsible uses of social media or responsible uses of social media, you can start getting on the lecture circuit. And my mom was so proud of me. I gave a talk at Harvard about professionalism in social media. And if you know me, this is kind of crazy that I'm talking to people about professionalism. but there I was. And and it was good, and it's a lot of lines on your CV, and you get to meet a lot of people, and you get invited to a lot of things. But I wanted to mention something that Brian Vardabedian, he's a GI doc in Houston, and he also talks a lot about professionalism in medicine on his blog, 33 Charts. And he asks some provocative questions. He says, where is the AMA guideline on patient-physician interactions in grocery stores or the post office? And he makes the point that someday, there is no such guideline because we're just expected to be able to handle that. And someday we'll think of this online professionalism or social media professionalism. It'll simply be just professionalism. And I put the telephone in the background there to kind of remind me all kinds of technology was greeted with skepticism and confusion and led to crazy anecdotes and unprofessional examples. The telephone, the answering machine, social media is no different. And while you can kind of make an interesting side career talking about professionalism, it's going to be relatively short-lived because I think people are just going to get acclimated and get adjusted with the technology. And so I didn't really see much of a future in going around scolding people. And so the next phase was actually kind of clear for me, and that was social media research, because I feel like I could make a big impact here, or more of an impact, because so far a lot of the social media research that's been done has been led by marketers and advertisers, and in emergency medicine we have a huge opportunity to impact the way we relate with patients and understand patients. So one of the early seminal papers was about using Twitter discussions to detect where H1N1 would strike next. It turns out it was a lot cheaper to use Twitter than to wait for cheaper and faster to use Twitter than to wait for the CDC flu culture results, which were always lagging by many weeks. And it turned out it was just as accurate. And I got into using social media for or being able to query Twitter and pull these tweets down into my into my computer, and then you can apply these natural language processing toolkits to kind of analyze sentiment and analyze meaning from the tweets, and you can make all kinds of neat inferences. So another group has looked at youth attitudes towards tobacco, and they found that people kids don't really care for smoking that much, smoking cigarettes, but the sentiment that they use in their tweets about smoking is actually kind of negative, but they're very enthusiastic about hookah bars and vaping, and it can kind of guide how public health should focus their interventions. And they did this very quickly and cheaply with Twitter, and they didn't have to make expensive surveys and go into cross-country tours and so forth. So I got to thinking that, this is my wake-up slide toward the end. This is crocodile, and crocodile's popping up in neighborhoods in the Midwest and Southwest. And in New York, we see a lot of PCP usage, and in Rhode Island, there's been bath salts and so forth. And really, toxicology has changed a lot in the last few years, and it's become a lot more regionalized, a lot of different newer drugs of abuse. So I got to thinking that maybe people were talking about these drugs on Twitter, and we could maybe predict what we would be seeing in the emergency departments, or maybe it would correlate well with federal surveys when they were available. So sure enough, yeah, a lot of people do talk about marijuana, cocaine, heroin, some of the classic drugs that are surveyed. And some of them are just news stories, but some of them are actually very frank expressions of usage. And it's actually very possible to build these algorithms that can sift through this and decide what is usage and what is just a news story. And you can make these maps to show where different drugs are being used, and they correlate very well with federal data when they're available. I probably don't have time to go into this, but Utah is a very dry town. We felt very good when we figured out that it matched up well with federal data. So if it works for these classic drugs of abuse, maybe it'll work well for some of these newer drugs, and that's what we're investigating now. But a whole new set of conferences has appeared, from Medicine 2.0 to MedX to Health 2.0 to mHealth. These are all new venues where we can discuss our research, and SAEM and ACEP have been very good about opening their doors to this kind of research too. Whole new textbooks have appeared for social media and clinical practice, and the existing informatics textbooks are now adding social media chapters. And sure enough, R21s and now R01s about using social media for substance abuse and for other emergency medicine applications have appeared, and it's like they read my mind. So I think I've been riding the crest a little bit of social media for many years, and it's been fun. It's been an adventure. If you're in the audience and you're wondering what's the next big thing, I have some speculation. It might be selfies, I mentioned, but it might be something like Google Glass. You have to be under a rock if you haven't heard about this. And a couple of emergency departments have already deployed Google Glass. You're probably going to need a policy, if not for your physicians, then maybe for your patients. Maybe they're going to walk in and start videotaping the whole thing, and you could be the person in your department that kind of anticipates this and saves the day, because one thing I've learned is organizations really like guidelines for new technology. If you feel like you've missed the boat with FOAMed, I think Michelle is very gracious and always looking for new talent, but if you could jump ahead to the next big thing, which could be like Oculus Rift and VR, virtual reality goggles and so forth, wearable devices, those Fitbits and Y-Things and stuff, could be a huge boon for emergency medicine. They could prevent a lot of emergency visits. They might cause a lot of visits, who knows, but a lot of people are going to be wearing these. A lot of elderly people are going to be wearing these to monitor for falls, for activity, for insulin. So it's going to be, I think, a big opportunity. In summary, I'm just going to say that if you find yourself evangelizing or espousing new technology and trying to convince people of it, that is the kind of stuff careers are made of. So get involved, write policies, be proactive, collect examples, be a lecturer who can, summon these things on a moment's notice, and you'll get invited to all kinds of stuff. And then develop and promote what the research agenda would look like. There's always people at SAEM that are willing to hear that kind of stuff, and you'll be surprised if you're promoting a research agenda long enough, eventually it'll come to pass. So, thank you.
All right. Anybody have any questions? Not all at once. No. We figured we'd leave enough time for people who had questions about either social media or our experiences or our thoughts or, well, anything.
I'm going to call out Sal for him to give an example.
Yeah, so Steve Smith, if you've not heard his name, is like kind of one of our big EKG guys in emergency medicine. And he's kind of come up with this modified Scarbosa criteria for left lumbar branch block and STEMI. And so the other day, I think I put something out on Twitter about two of the criteria are really good, but the third one's not so good, but he's working on the third criteria, but it still needs to be validated. And he tweeted back and he said, yeah, I'm trying to make this a multi-center study because I can't enroll enough people, so if you're interested, email me. And so I emailed him and he said, yep, here's all the information, let's get your site IRB approved, and you will not be involved in the study. And that happened like 4 days ago. So now I'm going to be doing modified Scarbosa criteria study with Steve Smith just because I tweeted something out on Twitter. So which would have otherwise never happened.
That's great. And that kind of goes back to what you had mentioned about the networking and the collaboration that we can get through social media that kind of helps us, because even though we're all at academic centers or affiliated with programs, we may be in areas where we may have some geographic isolation, which social media kind of helps alleviate all of that for both a regional, national, and even international audiences.
More comment than a question. But,
Yes.
remember who the audience is for your tenure. It's your medical school committees. Every medical school needs a social media curriculum for their medical students. And a lot of medical schools, they need a social media outlet for their medical students. You could start the medical school blog. You could give the lectures to the medical students. That's the dean's office at the medical school that's right. It's not people on Twitter necessarily, although it's great for networking, but if you want to direct things to your CV, something about medical school is the best way to get it.
I will also mention this past year, I noticed a lot more of medical student applications for residency mentioning that they were involved with social media at their medical school, where their medical school had a blog and they'd have medical students writing stories for it, which I did read.
Yeah, it's funny. One of my old friends is applying for a kind of C-suite position at a small hospital, and he wanted me to review his resume. I was like, I'm not nearly at that level or whatever, but he didn't mention on the resume that he's kind of a world expert in social media circles, and he's very popular and well regarded. And I just couldn't understand why he wouldn't do that. But I think it's maybe a generational thing. He's of the generation where that's still kind of a frivolous like side activity. But I think, especially when you're being considered for a high-profile job, I can only think that it helps.
So, Michelle, I think your department is taking your blog and kind of incorporating it into the department. I think, is that right? Do most academic departments accept this sort of effort and incorporate it into their, or like if you said in your department perhaps didn't ask it as much? I mean, have the departments provided you with any sort of support or allowed you to put your name on your blogs or accounts to help you out?
So I think it's a good question about, when you start a blog, you might want to think about, I wish I'd done this kind of proactively, now looking back, is think about, do you want it as part of your institution or outside? I think there are pros and cons to both ways, and now we kind of actually came to a head about 6 months ago. Were you at the meeting or something? We, after many lawyers, it is a separate entity from the university, because it just, for whatever reason, it worked out that, I would support my own time, and so I don't use department resources and whatsoever. But it kind of gets out of the whole, for me personally, there's a lot of like social media rules that if I wanted to change and be nimble about how I want to innovate, it has to go through a lot of red tape. And for me, my stuff kind of goes a little bit too fast for that UCSF red tape to get through, that we kind of decided to split from that standpoint. That being said, there are some amazing blogs that are supported by universities, like there's the UCSF Pediatrics blog that's very successful, as well as it sounds like Mayo is about to start one. Sorry if I let the cat out of the bag. But I think that's something you want to think about moving forward. I think I just don't really know what to do, so it's probably going to be on a case-by-case basis how you decide who's going to sponsor and how you sponsor.
Yeah, why don't we just work from front to back? Because I'm not sure whose hand went up first.
Similar to that question, so what's your comments or thoughts about universities that still view the traditional publication as sort of the gold standard try to impress them with your blog reach, how you get invited to speak at international conferences. How do you get around that, or how do you try to convince them that this is also good work as well?
Yeah, I'll comment on that one. Thanks, I'll take that one.
You got it.
So some of it depends, and like for the RC with the ACGME model, they've kind of expanded that it does count towards scholarly activity from the RC standpoint. But from a university standpoint, it's really going to come down to what hard and fast rules they're holding for you, and that's going to be institution specific. That being said, each journal is having opportunities for things that we're used to, like social media posts, like Academic EM. Has like the Pearls lecture series and the Dynamic EM lecture series, which you can go in and it becomes a publication indexed in the journal, indexed in PubMed. So they're offering for a lot of us ways to get involved and get that citation that our universities or our hospitals want, but in a method that we're used to. So that would be one way around it. And other journals have similar formats too. And that way you can play the academic game, but still do what you enjoy.
Just to follow up on that, I think I'm looking more towards a more circuitous long-term win from that. It's going to be a little bit of a road in that, we are starting to write guidelines. We're starting to join committees. I think SAEM is they listen to what the social media committee says. CORE has a social media committee. That if you can get these guys together, and I think there are some inklings of white papers coming out, establishing social media products as valid academic products. I think as more of that momentum and critical mass of papers comes out from national organizations that we are on, that hopefully will change with time. But in the meantime, I think you try that double dip, innovate on Flip DM like you're doing, and then publish something about it in an innovation journal.
But more to your point, ask them why a publication is so important. It's important because that journal has such a circulation, such an impact factor, and then you can say, I have my own impact factor, and it's bigger than a lot of journals. So, like that should carry weight with someone.
Yeah.
Sort of along the same line, have you approached, committees on academic promotions directly to say this is what my department is doing, this is what people are doing, how is that going to be framed within the committees themselves so that you can get them looking proactively? I work at a very traditional institution who could use some enlightenment, with people behind me, and I'm just wondering if there's a opportunity to do that, to really form a committee to help the COAP committee, judge these things.
Yeah, I guess I'm fortunate. I'm actually up for promotion soon, and I've been told that they take into account the social media stuff. So I haven't been too worried about trying to persuade members of the promotions committee. So I don't know if you're at an institution where that doesn't happen. I don't know. Do they have their own conferences? Or do they network? Are they on Twitter?
There's a lot of committees.
Yeah.
So maybe what we should ask this group to do is figure out how you can get someone relatively senior in your department to start making this decision. Because COAP usually has people at the professor level, but if there's people in your department, my department, that can go to COAP and represent these things. Because as you've experienced, as Nick was saying, the idea of speaking to older people about these topics is like, what? Twitter? That's just people that's not medical publishing. So, I think we probably should go proactively from here to make that one of your goals to get people in traditional academic settings to start reaching out to co-op committees for that.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I've noticed that every time this topic comes up when it comes to promotions, it gets just a wee bit easier to get in the door, and at least you get a few more sentences in before they kind of cut you off. And I almost got to get into the pitch. And so I think it's getting easier. They're like, okay, I understand. I just don't know what to do with this and how to compare it actually to original research. Where do you put it? Do you put it on the order of textbooks? And in my mind, I think it's probably on the order of a little bit above online textbook because you have a lot of metrics you can measure and show impact. But I think over time, the person I named, the furthest I got was actually to the Academy of Medical Educators at UCSF, and they've been very open to this, and they said, listen, the way to get around this to start is to think about the Educator 2.0 portfolio, well, the Educator Portfolio 2.0 that should be coming out soon. And it's just a lot more framed, and it gives you a lot more room to list all of these analytics that do come out of blogs and show, the map, the number of cities, number of hits, and if this is kind of an established template on portfolios, and that eventually gets rolled into CDs more regularly, especially in our traditional institutions, I think over time it'll become more accepted. But I don't think it's going to be like any flip of the switch. Every year it's going to be a little easier.
Gentleman right behind you.
So, in traditional institutions, and very certain cities are extraordinarily traditional when it comes to social media or anything involving a computer. Now, have you ever been on the other end of like a witch hunt where they've tried? I can name 10 people in the past 4 years who have been canned for, anonymous posts on Twitter. How have you dealt with that?
Since I was the professional. No. So I give a lecture every year to the new interns about appropriate and responsible use of social media, and I'm called in sometimes to adjudicate, like when there's a questionable tweets or someone might have said something that could be misinterpreted. So I don't know. I try to proactively make sure that the residents know and the students know what they can and can't do. And we popularize these guidelines that we've written, and we kind of put it in their face. And they're good guidelines. They have a lot of real world examples, and they kind of speak to. It's not just like an abstract list of thou shall not. It's like we had a student who mentioned that they saw a patient, and then they put it on social media, and then the patient found out how why would you do this? Was it really worth it? Maybe it was worth a laugh or two, but it could cost you your career. It really puts things in perspective for them, and so we've been fortunate we haven't had too many problems.
Most of our problems and concerns that have come up have been concerns about professionalism. And the social media aspect was just one part of an overall professionalism issue. It was just one more thing in addition to several other red flags. So as a social media issue alone, hasn't really been a problem.
And I also probably would want to flip that question back to you guys and say, is this a problem partly because they don't have any good role models in this space? Are there not enough of us showing how to exist in this space? And I would say that's part of the reason. I think we should kind of join, role model what should be done, and show them the philosophy that when in doubt, leave it out. That's the whole, that's why everything in the blog that comes out, all the final filter is me, and I'm like, when in doubt, I'm going to publish that. So, I encourage you just to join and maybe tweet a couple of things and figure out what it's like to exist in the social media space and show others how it's done.
Have you, I guess what I'm really asking you is, instead of role modeling for the user, to actually go towards the administration and take a harder stance to influence their opinions or the way that they review and say, yes, that may or may not have been the best thing or may not have been academically relevant, but there's also doesn't harm anything. There's nothing wrong with that. That's their personal account. Because when we sit in the social media committee, it's like-minded, right? Everyone in this room is probably like-minded in the sense that we agree that this is, should have happened 5 years ago. But have we tried to branch out into more of the general assemblies or gain, presence in more part committees that would be in front of someone who would make better decisions?
On the local level, yes, we've gotten involved with our departments. On the national level, in a way, because what you'll find is that a lot of people on social media have kind of branched out into other areas. Like Nick has moved into other areas, Michelle has, so have I. Brett sits on the board for 2 more days. So, we do have people in social media that are parts of the social media committee that also have other duties. And we've kind of branched out. And locally, I can say that I've had some learners that have had professional post issues, but have also had ones where the administration had been concerned about, and we've defended and said that's not an issue. Maybe the one before was, but this one, it's fine. Leave them alone.
So some of the blogs are starting to reach a point where they have lots of contributors, they open contributors consistent, they're peer review, and at the same time they're being sort of, they're, maybe we're arguing about whether they're as good as a textbook chapter or something kind of thing. Like, why not just follow the journal?
I think he anticipated
You see what I'm saying? Like, if it's functioning as a journal, right, it's taking submission, it's peer reviewed, it's having sort of article-length submissions.
It's a wonderful question. I think.
I think that's a great idea, and I think it won't be long before you see something like that. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah.
I think it's just a holdover of how the language developed around what became blogs and how blogs have developed, and it's just a holdover.
It's all about timing when you release all these kind of surprising things.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite yet.
I guess a related question would be, is there, like, our GLIs and the sort of infrastructure journals are actually not the sort of meta blogs?
With the, you mean with the use? Let me make sure I understand. Using the digital object identifiers with the traditional journals now and online publishing, if they're kind of moving towards kind of a meeting up between blogs and journals. Interestingly, the editors over at the last session about predatory online journal or predatory journals said that probably in the next 10 years, the traditional print and the traditional publishing format of the journals, especially the big houses like Elsevier and Wiley, will be gone and totally different. So at some point, there probably will be a meeting halfway and a melding of things, but not in like the next year or two.
You can kind of start seeing this hybrid happening without anyone doing it. Because do you guys use Google Scholar? It's a service, indexing service of your publications. And I searched myself recently, and half of my citations are actually my blog posts. And they're falling into that. And they don't really make a differentiation between the two. So I think naturally things are evolving in that direction.
And if Google makes it so, it's so.
I remember I was taking a survey a few years ago, and it was like, how do you get your medical information? And it was New England Journal, JAMA, Kevin MD. It was like the third. And Kevin MD started blogging around the same time I did, and he's now considered like a major force of medical news dissemination, and yet he still very much considers himself a blogger and not a publisher, a peer-reviewed publisher for sure. But yeah, I think these distinctions are going to be academic soon enough.
Pun intended.
Ed Panachek, UC Davis. So I'm the enemy here, and let me just inject a dose of reality here for you just a little bit. So I'm on the Promotions and Tenure Committee at my institution for the School of Medicine. I was chair of that for years. And these groups are volunteers. You don't get paid to do this. You have no extra time to do this. They don't give you any protected time to do it. It's pure volunteer work. And to be on these committees, you usually have to be a full professor. So it's not going to be any young people who are understanding this stuff. So until you are on those committees, it's not going to really have people representing this sort of perspective on the committees themselves. These committees are wrestling with many, many things to decide whose packet is worthy of promotion, if not tenure, and whose is not. And you mentioned one of them. They're really struggling with the open access journals now, the predatory journals. You pay $50 and it's published. That's very different than peer review. These committees consider one landmark high impact article to be worth 10 regular articles and 100 of those kind of articles. So they're weighing all these things. What if you have an online electronic textbook and it gets updated every year? You get to list that as a publication every year, when traditionally, Rosen's got updated every 5 years, so you got credit every 5 years. I mean, how do you weigh all these sorts of things? And if they're struggling with those sorts of things, and video teaching things online, and does this go in the category of alternative electronic media? Does it go in the category of limited distribution? All the different institutions have different categories for these publications. If they're struggling with those, trust me, they're really struggling with this kind of stuff. And they're not going to figure it out. And if it's going to get figured out, you're going to have to figure it out. The field is going to have to set up definitions for itself. If you publish a peer-reviewed publication, the committee knows about impact factors. They know about the HFI index. They know about all of these sorts of things. And they can quantitate very well. It's said that promotions and tenure committee members can count better than they can read. So they can count publications rather than read through each one of these and try to figure it out on their own. They have limited time. So if you can come out with an impact factor for Twitter accounts of who is really peer reviewed, who is high quality, who's getting the best hits in the best way, in a way that you can give them a number that they can attach to and say this is worthy and this is not, and not just because I think, therefore I write. How much value does that have? But if you can figure that out yourself and deliver it to them as a package, then they can perhaps wrap their hands around it and use some of that. But if you don't do that, forget it. It's not going to happen.
Dave Howard, University of Chicago, I mean, again, the private promotions pays for decades. And I was actually wanting to ask you a question, Michelle, but you may have answered it. You're the traditional, very highly academic institution. Did they take into account in the Zilla, which is really wonderful stuff, in this new world? When you got to be appointed or promoted to associate professor?
It's hard to say. I mean, to be frank with you, I think it depends on who you talk to, and I think the department is very supportive. And then beyond that, it's kind of hit or miss. Fortunately, this is in a way my second career, so I have all this other stuff that I'm working on that I kind of focus on there. And this is kind of like my homeland. This is where I talk about this media and blogs and education. And I think it really kind of thrives in these environments. But to kind of go back to Panachek's question is that, we were hoping not to release this information too soon, but Brent Thoma and a bunch of us are on a MedEd Life Research Collaborative studying exactly kind of this impact factor idea, because we agree, it's all about numbers, and people don't have time to read this huge narrative about, oh, my blog is better than something else. That's not, not apples to oranges. And this social media index is something we studied and tried to, and actually having pretty good success and validating for the EM blogs and podcasts and emergency medicine, because it's actually very well cataloged. And it does have some face value in terms of looking at different metrics, including Alexa rank, Alexa page rank, Twitter followers, Facebook followers. Did a kind of a logarithmic thing. We had some fancy stats person help us out with it. And it showed that, we, as especially have an extremely powerful presence in blogs and podcasts, we actually can rank the top 100 people or blogs and podcasts by SMI or social media index. And we actually have, a greater reach following than actually almost all the emergency medicine journals out there. And so we did a whole study. It's kind of in process with JAMA, and we haven't been rejected yet, so I'm going to take that as a win. So we're looking at that exactly that. We're also looking at quality indicator metrics for what make up quality blogs and podcasts, thinking about the individual indicators that indicate quality. So in a way, maybe we can create a checklist, maybe we can create some objective measure of what's higher quality than others. I know we're still working on that. That's a research project still in progress, but I agree with you. This is kind of the next wave. That's where there's enough of us in this space that we need to start thinking about this in a more thoughtful process.
And like a lot of things that have come up at this conference and other conferences about change is that this is going to be a long road. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So we may see small changes, incremental changes, but it's not going to be a big revolution overnight. It's going to take time and work. Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much.